education-wise. I have a undergrad in mathematics education. That's from Southern University at New Orleans here in our great city. Also a Master of Education from the University of New Orleans in Education Administration, and a Doctor of Philosophy degree in Education Administration from Mississippi State University. My professional experience for almost now the last 20 years includes being a high school math teacher at Andrew Jackson Fundamental Magnet High School, which is located in St. Bernard Parish, Chalmette, Louisiana. I served in that role for 7 years. In 2004, right after I received my PhD, I moved to the district office in St. Bernard and became the middle school curriculum coordinator for math and science, performed that duty for an entire school year. And then in August of 2005, while I was serving that role, Hurricane Katrina came and closed all of our schools in St. Bernard Parish. And so at that time, I was displaced like everyone else in the city. I moved my family temporarily at that time to Atlanta, Georgia. Worked in the school system there for, I believe, maybe 2 weeks. I was traveling home every single weekend, and my mind was focused on New Orleans and my hometown and the school system, and so I didn't feel that it was right for me to remain in that position and the students in Clayton County in Georgia to remain a teacher there. And so I did resign because, like I said, it just was not fair to the children there. And so I returned back home in the month of November. We were fortunate in St. Bernard to rebuild, or not rebuild, but also to open our first school in November of 2005, which was our unified school. So myself, along with all other administrators, as well as teachers, we returned that first day to open a unified school. So I worked there. I taught high school mathematics for the remainder of that school year. When the school year was over, I decided I wanted to take a greater role in the rebuilding efforts in St. Bernard. So I indeed resigned from the school system there and became an assistant principal at Alice M. Hart Charter School, which was in New Orleans, part of the Algiers Charter Schools Association. And so during that time as an assistant principal, I also took the opportunity to run for elected office in St. Bernard Parish and became a school board member in St. Bernard, and was able to work for now, which is the last 9 years, as an elected school official representing District 9 in St. Bernard Parish, responsible for the governance of the school system, but more in particular, for the last 9 years, we've been working on the rebuilding of the school system in St. Bernard. After serving as an assistant principal for 1 year, I became the founding principal of Algiers Technology Academy and served in that role for 4 years, and actually had the awesome opportunity to build that school from the ground up. After serving for 4 years, became the director of academics for the Algiers Charter Schools Association. So at that point, I became the chief person responsible for academics in the organization. And I served in that role for 1 year, and then became the superintendent of East Feliciana Parish. Served there for 30 months. And then now I returned back home to be the superintendent of the Orleans Parish School Board to continue as we finish the rebuilding efforts, but also to move the district into the next phase that's going to happen over the next 10 years. Over the last 10 years, I think many wonderful things have transpired, but before I can talk about the last 10 years, I guess for me, I have to start with what I can recall from prior to Hurricane Katrina. And of course, at that time, I was not working in the school system. But I can remember when the state had identified the majority of the schools in New Orleans as unacceptable, academically unacceptable. I can recall the specials that were on the local news where they went into individual schools and look at the facilities, for example, and the restrooms where some restroom stalls didn't even have a door. And this picture was painted of, if you would, the the side of the school system that we all should have been ashamed of. A strong picture was painted for us, and then of course August 2005, Hurricane Katrina came. And so now we're looking at what has happened over the last 10 years. So even going back to that story of the horrific things that I can recall as just being a citizen from the local metropolitan area, is that now we have a school system where your majority of the schools are not truly academically unacceptable. You have a school system where, because of facility management and the rebuilding efforts from our federal government, where our students are in schools way better than they were in prior to Hurricane Katrina. And to be honest, schools now, that if the storm in that period of time did not take place, I don't think we would be seeing what we see today. And so that has been very significant. So even as we talk about K-12, I think speaking of the environment that our students are in today versus the environments they were in the past, that's something that we have to speak of, because now our students are going to schools every single day that is appropriate in my mind, that's appropriate and something that our citizens expect of us. The academic side, right now, we have a large group of charter schools that's part of the movement here in New Orleans. We have our network schools, but no matter if you talk about charter or network schools, we have schools in our district right now that I truly know that the number one priority is children, that we're educating children to higher levels. We're getting students to graduate from high school on time. We have our students not only graduate from high school on time, but also we're seeing more kids going to college now than ever before, where this is a different story prior to 2005. And so we have a lot to be proud of. And even as we speak of the hard work that's happening in our schools every single day and what our teachers and our administrators are doing, I can also say as a city, when it comes down to education, we're very serious, because if schools are not doing what they're supposed to do, we're not turning and looking the other way. What we're doing today, we're closing those schools and sending our students to better environments. And so it's a more aggressive approach than I think we've ever taken here in the city of New Orleans. And I can go on and on about the wonderful things that have happened in our school district over the last 10 years. Many times in our nation, we hear conversation about the black male, for example, young African American men. Many of them, the stories that you hear across the country, the alarming rate of those young people's lives ending sooner than they should. But here in New Orleans, we have something that we can brag about as far as our African American young men, because not only are we getting them to graduate from high school on time and allowing them to receive their high school diploma and having that rite of passage, but we are surpassing that compared to the state level here in New Orleans. But also New Orleans has surpassed the national rate of graduating African American young men. So we're doing great work here in our city. And again, it's because a lot of our decision making right now, we are making sure that the decision making is happening as closest to the students as possible at that school level. I think that has made a huge difference, because our schools and our leaders are not going through a bureaucracy to make certain decisions. They understand the students that they're serving. They understand the population that they're servicing, and they're making sure that the decisions are made in the best interest of the children that the public and the families have entrusted them to have at this time. When you look at all of the data that's out there, and that tells a story, and it tells a story of progress. But until you walk in our schools and talk to our students, you don't really understand what has transpired. Students today, as you converse with them, they can stand before you, and if you ask a very simple question, what do you want to be when you grow up, for example? We have students not only today that will actually tell you once they graduate from high school, this is what I want to do. But we have students now more than ever before will say that when I graduate from high school, I want to become an elementary school teacher and I'm going to attend LSU. Our students have very, very specific goals at an early age today, where I can even speak to my own experience. That was a conversation for me probably more realistically when I was in high school. But now our elementary students, they are able to have those conversations. But also when you walk into a school, being able to see teaching and learning firsthand, to see what our students are learning, to see how our students are accepting the challenges that are placed before them every single day. When you look at the data, it won't tell that story. But when you take the qualitative approach and actually analyze what's actually happening in our schools and be able to actually interview teachers, school leaders, and hear of the struggle, because every single student, when I visit schools, for example, and I have conversations with principals, and we're just standing in the hallway, for example, you would have a student that would just pass us in the hallway, and the principal would tell me a story about that child, the obstacles that they're faced every single day, but yet that young person, that scholar, he or she is in school. As a principal, I have a ton of stories during my tenure as a principal of the struggles of my student. And one thing I often would share with my faculty and staff, because yes, in school we have discipline problems, we have issues that we have to deal with, but for those issues, it's very important for us as leaders to understand how we're going to respond to it. For example, I would share with my staff to let them know that even though we started school at 8:05 in the morning, our students had an entire day that took place prior to coming through the school door. We have to recognize that. We have to accept those challenges that are coming through our doors every single day, and find ways, whether it's socially, emotionally, to be able to address that. So as anyone will come through our school door and come to see our schools, for me, I want them to talk to the people who are living it every single day, to really have a true understanding of the hard work and dedication that's happening in our schools every single day. In the next 10 years, I look at the next 10 years having a lot to do with currently me. As the new superintendent here in New Orleans, I have a vision that simply can be wrapped around one theme, and that's unification of our school system. We have gone through 10 years of exponential growth here in the district. No matter if you're talking about academics, the facilities, the progression of our students, and the list goes on and on. But the next 10 years, we are given the opportunity right now to begin the process of writing what the next 10 years, what it's going to look like. For me, in order to unify the school system and understanding that we have a system of schools, but number one, we have to recognize that we do not have the same school system we had pre-Katrina, and that we cannot operate our organization as if we're still operating the school system we had before. So my goal right now is through several areas to address that. Number one is through governance. being able to put policy in place that will allow us to govern this different type of school system. But having a governance structure that understands the role of charter schools, understands the role of their autonomy, but also one that recognizes that all schools are not charter, and having policies and procedures, but also to be able to run schools that are not charter schools to be charter-like. Being able to give those school leaders the autonomy, and so we're working on that. But also, whether we're talking about, again, charter schools or network schools, being able to meet the needs of our parents. Our parents are looking for schools that meet their individual needs. Our parents are looking for schools that, if my first child is allowed to enroll in this school, that as my other children enroll in school, I want them to be able to attend that same school. Looking at the structure of how we respond to the needs of families. Right now, our students travel all over the city. To be able to look at how we better serve families when it comes down to transportation, for example. All those things are going to be addressed in the next 10 years. But more importantly, is that families truly have access to the best possible education. As far as having that single voice in the city of New Orleans for public education, my role as superintendent is that voice. I'm responsible for being that lead voice, that unified voice that speaks to our community, speak to various stakeholders throughout the city of New Orleans to say, for public education, this is what we stand for, and here's the direction that we're going in. Again, it has worked to get us to this point, but we have to transition to a point where you have that voice just like every other district here in Louisiana, every other district in our nation. They have that single voice that speaks towards public education in that city.